and present, please.
Good day to you all. I hope I'm audible. Thank you to the chairpersons and many thanks to the organizers of this excellent meeting for giving me an opportunity to speak this morning. My lecture topic is malnutrition and late presentation. And in the next few minutes or so, I'm going to try and give you a snapshot view of how these issues impact pediatric cardiac surgery in our country and if there is any hope on the horizon. I have no disclosures and all patient photographs have been shown with permission. This 16-year-old analysis of the STS database reveals declining discharge mortality over a period of time, particularly so for the more complex operations, and down to 3% as was alluded to in the earlier talk. The surgical outcomes in low-middle income countries and in our country, despite accurate and technically appropriate surgery, have not been comparable to the high-income countries. And so many pediatric surgeons, including our previous speaker, believe that this is due to our huge burden of cardiac malnutrition, cachexia, and late presenting heart disease, which have the potential to translate into various postoperative complications. And hence the talk for this morning. The IQIC has attempted to address all of this with varying degrees of success, and they have succeeded in reducing mortality in large cohorts of children down from 6% to more acceptable levels. So in the next few minutes or so, I'm going to give you a snapshot view of what is possible when cardiac surgery is performed in malnourished and late presenting infants. What are the unique challenges, the possible solutions, and whether outcomes can be improved in this very difficult group of patients. We all know we are a land of great disparities and grinding poverty where not two but multiple Indias coexist. Malnutrition occurs across all age groups, but malnutrition in infants is probably the most challenging. And this has been reported to have a varying incidence in published literature, but the concurrence is that about half of all congenital heart disease who present for cardiac surgery in low-middle income countries have severe malnutrition, that is Z-scores of less than -3. What is the data on surgical outcomes? It's highly conflicting. This is a recent paper on preoperative malnutrition from North America, a retrospective paper, which showed increased mortality with adverse outcomes. And it's a very alarming data because apart from the increased risk of surgical death, there was an increased risk of several adverse events, including cardiac arrest, perioperative infections, and length of stay. And all of this was most marked in children with chronic malnutrition such as this. This is in contrast to a prospective study from Southern India, a collaborative paper with Boston, where they showed that failure to thrive and low birth weight did not appear to adversely affect surgical outcomes or be associated with a higher incidence of postoperative infections. And this paper unambiguously concludes that malnutrition should not be a deterrent for early surgery. What is our own experience? At the inception of our program, which is about 30 years ago, simple VSTs died despite good surgery, and we found that malnutrition was associated not only with higher mortality, but with higher morbidity as well. Published literature does not detail exactly what happens to these malnourished patients when they undergo cardiac surgery. We observed that poor chest wall compliance caused varying degrees of atelectasis, rapidly leading to panatelectasis following extubation, giving rise to a cascade of deleterious events, leading to reintubations, failed extubations, sepsis syndromes, air leak syndromes, acute lung injury, and culminating in death. What are the strategies that we evolved? They were very simple and they've led to very gratifying outcomes over the years. And this was of early extubation to improve alveolar recruitment by prone nursing, elective nasal CPAP, and early enteral feeding. The current understanding of malnutrition and congenital heart disease is detailed in this paper published in the Cardiology and the Young, and it unequivocally recommends that surgery should not be deferred in malnourished infants. So in summary, malnutrition is an everyday problem even in 2021. Many unknowns still persist, but it need not be a risk factor for adverse outcomes by utilizing focused strategies for ventilation and nutritional therapy. Sudden death in these infants may be mitigated by attention to nutritional recovery syndromes. We do not, however, know what we do not know. What I have not discussed and which I can leave for the discussion is, should we offer surgery? What are the possible outcomes when malnutrition coexists with preoperative preoperative sepsis, fungemia, and preoperative lower respiratory tract infection in patients such as these who were successfully operated. Moving on to late presenting congenital heart disease, there is very little, there is no clear definition published anywhere, but most of us understand that late presenting congenital heart disease is perceived to be presenting late in the natural history with consequent transient or irreversible hemodynamic and pathological alterations that have the potential to impact medical surgical approach, the surgical risk, and surgical outcomes. And it has nothing whatsoever to do with chronological age. Example, a 10-year-old atrial septal defect may not be considered to be late. On the other hand, a 1-month-old transposition intact septum with cardiovascular collapse is considered to be presenting late. Now, we all know that late presentation in our country is not uncommon. Large left to right shunts present not only with cachexia, but with severe pulmonary hypertension. And a lot of tetralogies present with hypercyanosis and polycythemia. Sick and complex infants present quite commonly late with transposition, total anomalous pulmonary venous connection, and Al-Kappa with varying degrees of systemic ventricular dysfunction and pulmonary hypertension. Presentation with cardiovascular collapse and organ dysfunction is not uncommon. Moving on to the late polycythemic tetralogy, which in our unit comprises about 1/3 of all tetralogies who present for cardiac surgery. Many of them have postoperative challenges which comprise of cardiac issues, severe biventricular dysfunction, complex arrhythmias, and non-cardiac issues related to bleeding into various organ systems as well as multi-organ dysfunction. In majority of cases, the surgery in the polycythemic tetralogy is fairly transformational. You can see this child with chronic consumptive coagulopathy and 6 days after surgery. However, a number of them pose unique challenges, and this is due to their restrictive physiology due to an underlying hypertrophied and fibrosed right ventricular muscle and left ventricular volume loading due to a whole host of collaterals, both large and small, which cause endotracheal and parenchymal lung bleeds, giving rise to a biventricular dysfunction, which is not infrequently difficult to manage postoperatively. So the solution for this that we've adopted is a preemptive CT angio in all polycythemic tetralogies, followed by cardiac catheterization and coiling wherever required. The APGARs, or the finer collaterals, pose a greater challenge, and they cause varying degrees of endotracheal and lung parenchymal bleed, necessitating prolonged ventilation with positive end expiratory pressure, followed by non-invasive ventilation after extubation. And management of hemodynamics in many of these patients is often a struggle and a balancing act. So effectively, many late tetralogies, high PEEP is often needed, in contradistinction to traditional wisdom, which advocates early extubation and avoidance of PEEP. We also recommend a preoperative neuroimaging in polycythemic tetralogy to detect, even if they're asymptomatic, to pick up recent or old infarcts, brain abscesses, and porencephaly. And timing of surgery in many of these patients is a major balancing act, whether the child will wake up or not, always remaining a worry, as illustrated in these 2 catastrophic near misses which occurred after cardiac surgery, despite a normal neuroimaging prior to surgery. Posterior fossa bleed, subdural bleed, needing neurosurgery. After cardiac surgery, both were fortunately successfully discharged. So our management protocol of the late presenting tetralogy is a highly preemptive one and needs a meticulous preoperative assessment and preparation, not only of the heart, but of all other body systems. So with all of these modalities, our 30-day tetralogy mortality has steadily improved, despite 1/3 of them presenting somewhat late in the natural history. Our approach to low cardiac output is a systematic, protocolized approach. It's an integrated approach, utilizing well-described physiological maneuvers in literature. We tend to use ventilation as a powerful hemodynamic tool and use a lot of non-invasive ventilation in severe left ventricular dysfunction following surgery. With all of these, we've had gratifying outcomes without recourse to mechanical support, even in scenarios like the late presenting Al-Kappa. We all know that neonatal heart disease, when presenting late, is associated with a significant increase of in-hospital mortality and a lot of morbidity. So looking at our experience with the late presenting transposition and regressed left ventricle, most of them are managed without mechanical support. And this is by the philosophy of pattern recognition. This slide shows you the intensive care course after a late primary arterial switch done at between 50 to 100 days. You can see that it's highly predictable. The first 48 hours are extremely unstable with elevated left atrial pressures and varying degrees of hypertension. At the third postoperative day is more stable, facilitating sternal closure and extubation, which are highly planned events. So the infant arrives in the intensive care unit with the usual combination of medications, and the elevated left atrial pressure is managed with muscle relaxation and sedation and borderline blood pressures with various vasopressors, which is followed by a subsequent rapid recovery with our median length of stay of under 2 weeks. So our outcomes in the primary late arterial switch is extremely gratifying in those older than 21 days, and the surgical mortality is under 4% with a minimal ECLS requirement. Looking at our current profile of pulmonary hypertension, there are children with large left to right shunts and infants who present late in the natural history. And we learn to live a life without inhaled nitric oxide, and our approach to pulmonary hypertension is really based on avoiding triggers of pulmonary hypertension and appropriate ventilatory strategies, relying on lung recruitment. So we all know that the lowest PVR, or the pulmonary vascular resistance, is found when the lungs are ventilated at normal FRC. With all of these, our outcomes in very high risk groups have been very gratifying. A quick look at the physiology after surgery for late presenting total anomalous pulmonary venous connection, which again comprises about a third of our patients with TAPVC. And this is the philosophy of ventricular load reversal, where there's acute left ventricular dilatation following rerouting of the abnormal veins. And this gives rise to the philosophy of left atrial pressure monitoring to diagnose so the anticipated postoperative problems, which are exaggerated in later presentation, is really related to a non-compliant left atrium, which gives rise to not only low cardiac output state, but significant endotracheal bleeding, giving rise to acute lung injuries. So our therapeutic approach is highly preemptive and rational and involves afterload reduction apart from strategies to control pulmonary hypertension. And this is an example of a 2-month-old obstructed mixed TAPVC whose blood pressures and left atrial pressure the same on 0 postoperative day, and these were managed conservatively, after which the child was discharged under 2 weeks. And a lot of this is summarized and a lot more in this paper published in Cardiology in the Young. So what are our outcomes been like? This is our 25-year, 30-day mortality, which showed that our discharge mortality is well under 2%, despite a lot of late presentation and malnourished infants undergoing surgery. So to conclude, malnutrition and late presentation, cardiac surgery in them is associated with many and ever-increasing challenges, but satisfactory early surgical outcomes are feasible by the process of knowledge translation and by simple low-cost homegrown strategies and by a process of continuous and ongoing innovation. But many of our practices need validation in the long run. Many thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you, Dr. Parvati. As always, a brilliant